on the Ohio River, and I've walked over these bridges hundreds of times, but we're getting a completely different perspective because we're underneath them. The Ohio River is unique because it's the largest tributary to the Mississippi in the nation. 14 other states have smaller rivers that join up with the Ohio before it joins up with the Mississippi further downstream. Back when America was being settled, Indian tribes roamed around these lands, and the Ohio River was a place of contention because the British and the French all wanted to settle westward in America, and so they started using the Ohio River as a means of transportation. And finally, they settled the city of Cincinnati here. The river, I always thought was infinitely deep, that there were hundreds of feet down below the surface that you can't really see through. But it's only about 27 feet deep on average. The very deepest it gets is in Louisville at 132 feet, but that's only because people have done things to make the river deeper. They've built serpentine walls and series of locks, and they've dug out the river because they didn't want it to be shallow. They wanted it to be deep.
You know what I wish I could do is I wish I could just drain this river and grab a metal detector and, I don't know, something to put stuff in and walk around under this water with, drain it and just find stuff. I'd sell my house and my car and give everything I had just to chance it that underneath this water here, there'd be something valuable. I bet there's tons of stuff that we're missing, We're just going right over it right now. But this water in this river, what we see, the surface of this water is kind of like churches. It's kind of like the spiritual experience in America. If you drive to Target sometime, wherever you're going, just down the street, count how many churches you pass, or like how many signs there are. There'll be first this, first that, second, third, saint, who knows who, saint, whoever, and there's tons of experiences. On a Sunday morning or whatever your typical church day is, you can go out and have a God experience in 10 showing churches right here in Cincinnati. Now, I'm not knocking that. Some of those churches I'd say, yeah, maybe that'd be cool. Maybe those churches are good. Some of those I'd probably say stay far away from. But it's kind of like this river, and it's kind of just on this same plane. It all kind of interacts in what you can see, and it's kind of like this God experience, this spiritual experience. It's like this river. And, God wants more than that. I'm on the Ohio River today. Rachel's on the Ohio River to tell you that God wants more than this surface spiritual experience. God wants depth in your life. God wants a depth where He's involved in every area of your life. I grew up in a town that was a really small town, but we had like 6 or 7 churches in the town. And there was all sorts of different things that you could experience God, and the spiritual side of Him. I went to one of the bigger churches in town, but basically the town was divided 50-50. There's people that would go to these churches and have this spiritual experience and learn about the Bible, learn about God, interact with God spiritually, and it was just kind of, to be honest, it was kind of like the surface of this river. Not bad, but not good. And so half the town, half the people in my school growing up, junior high, high school, half the people had this God experience, and half the people were struggling through life in this town. They didn't necessarily need someone to tell them about what the Bible said. They needed money to pay the rent. They needed a job. Some people were hurting mentally. They were going through times of depression. They were hurting in their relationships. And God says, you know what? I wish that churches did more than just a spiritual thing, this God experience. I want them to do that, but I want those people in that town that Jay grew up in, I want those people to understand that I want to be involved in their relationships. You see, God wants to interact with you in all areas of your life. God wants to interact with you in all areas of your life. I was reading, and this is how my life radically changed. I was reading in the Bible, and basically the Bible is a river guide, a boat manual. It's just kind of how to interact with this idea of surface versus depth. And so there's a book, this writing that this guy Luke did, and it's in 252. That's how they kind of mark the books of the Bible. Luke 252 says that Jesus grew mentally, physically, spiritually, and socially. You see, not a lot of places in the Bible we get to find out about how Jesus was a young person. a young guy, how he grew up. He usually picks up when he's about 30 years old or so. And so this was a really cool thing. Oh, this is how Jesus grew. This is how Jesus developed. All this Jesus that we knew when he was 30 years old and everything that you may hear in churches about Jesus' life, this is how he got there. He grew mentally, he grew physically, he grew spiritually, he grew socially. That means that he grew in relationships around him with maybe his neighbors and the people on his street where he grew up. He grew spiritually. He spent time in the temple. He did grow spiritually. He grew in this relationship with God. He grew physically. People around him probably said, hey man, if you eat this, you're going to get sick. But if you eat this, you're going to be healthy. You can stay in shape. You don't hear about that stuff in churches today. You don't hear about how Jesus grew mentally and probably how he just had to come across these thought patterns and how he had to think about everything that was around him. But God says, you know what? I want you to understand me in the sense that you have to grow in every area of your life in relation to me. That's radical. That's different. You see, I don't care if first time to church or you've been around a while, we all have questions. I've been doing this God thing where I've been trying to make God a part of my life for years. And I still have questions where mentally I'm like, you know what? Am I making the right decisions? Am I thinking the right way? Maybe I'm in a relationship with God for a long time. Maybe you're new to this. And you have questions mentally. You're like, man, I have questions about life. Maybe you have questions about like physically. You're just like, I hear things on the news and in papers and they're telling me about how to be a healthy person. Well, you don't hear a lot about that in the church. But God wants to be in that area of your life. He says, you know what, I want to be definitely involved in your spiritual life. This God experience, this is real. I want you to experience who I am. This God experience, I want to be involved in your life. And so when I think back to this town, they had it all together spiritually probably. They were doing this God experience, but they didn't have any sense about what was going on with the people around them. They didn't have any sense about how to interact with the feelings and the questions that they had. All right, so are you sold? How do you do it? How do you get depth in your life? The thing is, you got to start asking questions. That's the easy way. That's the only way, really. You got to start asking questions. How do I do that? You got to start thinking that way. You got to start saying, how do I get God's perspective? This experience with God, how do I bring this experience with God to my social life, with my friends? How do I bring this God experience to this loneliness that I'm feeling with my friends? How do I bring this God experience to my spiritual life and my questions about God? Start questioning God. Start asking questions. Questions will bring depth. Get out of the surface. Start asking questions. Bring depth to your life. That's what God wants for your life.